Good afternoon and welcome to today's lecture on the exhibition Salvador Dalí, The Image Disappears, the Art Institute's first ever exhibition devoted to Dalí. My name is Lara Balikci, and I am a research assistant in modern and contemporary art here at the Art Institute of Chicago. I'm thrilled you have joined us for today's sold-out member lecture. We have the pleasure of hearing from the curators of Salvador Dalí, The Image Disappears, the Art Institute's own Caitlin Haskell and Jennifer Cohen. Caitlin is the Gary C. and Francis Comer Curator in Modern and Contemporary Art and Director of Ray Johnson Collections and Research. She has worked at the Art Institute since 2018, and you may be familiar with her recent exhibitions here. Last summer's Cézanne retrospective, now on view at Tate Modern in London, co-curated with Gloria Groom, and the 2021 exhibition, Ray Johnson Care Of, co-curated with Jordan Carter. This year, Caitlin has been focusing on 3 Surrealism projects: a collection survey of Joseph Cornell, this exhibition on Salvador Dalí, and an upcoming exhibition, Remedios Varo Science Fictions, organized in collaboration with the Museo de Arte Moderno in Mexico City. This exhibition will open in July. She holds a BA in art from Davidson College and a PhD in art history from the University of Texas at Austin. Jennifer Cohen is curator of provenance and research at the Art Institute, specializing in modern art, particularly Surrealism, and working broadly to explore ownership histories with each of the museum's 11 curatorial departments. Her exhibitions and publications have addressed the avant-garde and its legacies, from collectively authored Surrealist shop windows in World War II-era New York to Ray Johnson's use of buttons as material and motif in the 1960s. She holds an MA from Cornell University and a PhD in art history from the University of Chicago, and her research has been supported by the Council for European Studies, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and the Daedalus Foundation. Now, please join me in welcoming to the stage Caitlin and Jen.
All right. Well, thank you, Laura, for that wonderful introduction and welcome. And it is fantastic, I have to say, to see so many people turning out for Dalí. Really, this is very impressive. As Laura said in the introduction, this is the Art Institute's first Dalí show ever. At the same time, we are no strangers to Dalí. The image that you see here is Dalí at the Art Institute in 1937. He's standing with a painting that you'll see upstairs. It's also the painting that's currently on our Michigan Avenue facade. And its title is A Chemist Lifting with Extreme Precaution, the Cuticle of a Grand Piano. He made this work in 1936. So who is Dalí at this moment? He's 33 years old. He's a member of the Surrealist group. He's just had his face on the cover of Time magazine the year before, and he's about to become what Jen and I call a Surrealist movement of one. This is the moment that our exhibition is really about. Dalí becomes Dalí in the 1930s, and our exhibition is a focused overview of this pivotal decade. So I'm going to say just a little bit more about this picture as I'm getting my notes together. But at the time that this photograph was made, this picture was not only on view at the Art Institute, it was already a Chicago picture in the collection of the dancer Ruth Page. And it was a very contemporary presentation. So it's on view just 1 year after it was made. The first time that Dalí showed at the Art Institute was several years before, in 1933, and this is an installation of the Century of Progress exhibition. Georgia O'Keeffe's painting of sky and clouds, if that's behind you. You're kind of going up those stairs, and Dalí's painting is the one that's just outlined in red. It's a work that's called Shades of Night Descending from 1931, today in the collection of the Dalí Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida. So if you were to have seen this picture in 1933, it would have looked like a very new and unexpected type of modern painting. So I'm going to ask you to take yourself back to a moment when surreal was not a household word, right? The look of this type of painting was very tight. It has a super precise technique. Your eye can take it in very quickly because it's relatively clear, yet there's, of course, an aspect of mystery to it. It's somewhat inexplicable. And over the course of this decade that we look at in our exhibition, you're going to see Dalí introduce a new set of symbols that will become personally associated with him, a very highly specific palette of intense colors, a very fascinating interest, actually, for us in use of scale. So some pictures that are going to seem like they're almost miniatures. And then also thinking about new realms that art can address, sort of issues of interiority that would not have been of interest, let's say, to a Picasso or a Matisse. In telling the story of Dalí in the 30s, we are not going to show you every work from the Art Institute's collection. We're not even showing you every work from the 30s. It's a very specific checklist. So Jen and I selected 12 works that we really wanted to know more about and to study in depth. So these are works that come from the permanent collection of modern and contemporary art, prints and drawings, photography, and the collections of the Ryerson Library and Archives. And then we were very fortunate to be able to call on our partners, our friends from around the world, from private collections and also institutional collections in North America and Europe, to really create the exact right group of conversation partners for the Art Institute's collection. And we've chosen to frame the show around the phrase, "the image disappears." We find this a very apt, descriptive phrase for the decade, and I'm going to hand it over to Jen to talk to you a little bit more about why we've chosen "the image disappears" as our subtitle.
Right. We're going to take you on a sort of walking tour through the galleries together today, but we wanted to start here, even though this work is late in the decade, just to give you a sense of why we chose the title, "The Image Disappears," for the show. So the drawing you see here on the left is a work from the Bergman collection that is on view all the time on the third floor of the Modern Wing. And we've just had a very special opportunity to bring together this preliminary drawing with the painting that it helped to realize. Here on the right from the Gala Salvador Dalí Foundation. And then centrally we have another more tightly rendered sketch for the same painting, which is in a local Chicago private collection.
This is the first time that these works are being shown together, and there are several firsts. But anyhow,
right.
I'll let you keep going.
And given the fragility of drawing, we sometimes say this is likely the last time that they will be displayed together as well. So the goal here in showing them all together, as we do in the show itself, is to show how Dalí really works to arrive at his signature ambiguous or two-way imagery. So going from the soft rendering, where you can see really a man's face and profile emerging, to the more tightly rendered version, where you can see a woman reading a letter, which is Dalí's interpretation of the painter Jan Vermeer's 17th century painting, A Woman in Blue Reading a Letter. So he's sort of pushing and pulling to arrive there. So the image disappears here in an optical sense, but you'll also see the image disappearing in many other ways throughout the exhibition. So we really took this idea and ran with it. And we're going to see, as we walk through the galleries together here, motifs of edibility and consumption, softness, deflation, techniques, painterly techniques which impart a ghostly effect to his paintings, and even actual spaces of hiding and paintings which themselves disappear. So with that in mind, we're going to return in the next slide to the beginning of the decade, and I'll let Caitlin take it from here.
Yeah. Okay, so show of hands, how many people have been into the galleries? Okay, many of you. So you recognize our quaint Pesh wall color here and this grouping of works. Just a little bit about how we decided to lay out the exhibition and sort of think about these groupings. Many of the works that are put together have an Art Institute work as sort of the anchor. So in this case, it's the pastel on the right, which is called Anthropomorphic Tower. That also is from the Bergman collection. And we've chosen to pair it here with two works from the same moment, and as you can see, the same palette. So the painting in the middle comes to us from the Pompidou. Its title is Guillaume Tell, or William Tell. It was in the collection of André Breton throughout his life. And Dalí really is sort of thinking about issues of father figures in his life, his actual father, and then also Breton as a father figure. And then on the left, we have a work from a private collection. And let's advance that. Premature ossification of a railway station. The titles are just so fantastic and shows Dalí's appreciation of poetry and wordplay. In a work like this from 1930, it's important to remember that Surrealist painting is not yet a codified thing, right? So you've got the Surrealist Manifesto as early as 1924, but at that point in time, we're still looking for who is going to be the great practitioner of this kind of philosophical and poetic movement. And Dalí, like many folks, thought that Giorgio de Chirico was kind of a really important precursor. And you can see aspects of de Chirico coming out here in these really sort of mysterious shadows. Where are those figural presences coming from? Also just the really tight rendering, the foreshortening. And of course, we've got our first signature melting clock here, which Dalí wonderfully referred to as the camembert of time. And Jen, do you want to talk to us a little bit about William Tell?
Sure. As Caitlin noted, this amazing and enormous painting and collage comes to us from the Pompidou Museum and was part of Breton's collection from the time of its making through the end of his life. I really encourage you to look at it up close. It has this extraordinary kind of combination of impasto painting techniques over to the left, and then areas of collage with the fig leaf and the bird's nest. Also, the lion's head is semi-collaged and heavily impastoed over, so you really do start to question what you're looking at. It's filled with kind of the imagery that he was working with in the Surrealist movement at the time. But as Caitlin noted, it's titled after the Swiss patriot, the legendary figure of William Tell, who was forced to shoot an apple off of his son's head. And so he uses this as a metaphor to explore father and son relationships via Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalyst whose work that he had been reading well before he crossed paths with the Surrealists in Spanish translation. So while you don't see sort of a bow and arrow here depicting kind of the William Tell story, you see the father here over to the right brandishing a pair of scissors, and the fig leaf is strategically placed so that we don't know what has happened here. It leaves the outcome to the imagination. But the subject of this work was really his banishment from his his paternal home. As Caitlin mentioned, it's a bit ironic that that Breton would have kept this in his collection for his whole life, because he had a similar rupture with Breton starting in 1934, and really what I call a slow motion expulsion, which becomes final in 1939. So I like to think that this is a little bit of Breton's holding on to their relationship in a way. Yeah. But we can go to the next slide. Sure. So we felt like this work was, the William Tell was really the best, the most ideal work to put this in context, this kind of luridly graphic pastel also from the Bergman collection. Really similar palette and iconography from his early Surrealist years.
Yeah, and that almost like Art Nouveau style that's coming in, which was frankly a surprise to me when we started looking at these pictures of the early part of the decade.
You'll see that spanning throughout the show as well.
So on the other side of this gallery, we introduce Dalí's muse and his partner, Gala. And we also start looking at some sculptural objects. So just working across this wall, you'll see an initial pairing of two miniature paintings. So the portrait of Gala with two lamb chops in equilibrium on her shoulder from 34, the year of their marriage. The work on the right is in the collection of the Art Institute. Both of them are identically sized, and they're both painted on blocks of olive wood. In the work on the left, which is, of course, polychromatic and more fully realized, that's a work that Dalí kept in his own collection throughout his life. He purportedly kept it on his person the first time that he traveled to the United States. And when you see it in the show, it has such a fabulous presentation. I'm going to try to go back a slide. There we go. You can see the frame on it is just so wonderful and over the top. And he's also used this crimson velvet going around as a liner. So as you're going through the exhibition, you'll see that we tried to pick up on Dalí's design sensibility and bring that into the exhibition. And we actually made several new frames for Art Institute works to bring them back to his preferred style. But Jen, do you want to talk to us about this wonderful work?
This is also somewhat of a portrait of Gala. It's titled Surrealist Object Functioning Symbolically, which is really a descriptive title. It's what Dalí called this type of object that he made, but it's also sometimes called Gala's shoe. So the idea that Gala's shoe would stand in for his wife herself recalls Freud's notion of the sexual fetish, where things like shoes, fur, would stand in for the person of desire. So Breton had described the notion of dream objects, that we might want to, at a certain point in time, he said, recreate objects that appeared in our dreams. He also would sometimes shop at flea markets and find objects or discover them that gave him an incredible sense of déjà vu. One of Dalí's main contributions to the Surrealist movement, in addition to his Surrealist painting, was the idea of the Surrealist object. And what he brought to it was saying, we're not going to merely reproduce things that we dream of. We're going to create objects which actually have symbolic functioning now in waking life. And so the way this played out in the shoe is it has a simple mechanical function where you can actually dip the image of a shoe, which is depicted on a lump of sugar, into a cup of milk. And so, of course, our object is an addition, which renders the milk as wax, but it's such an evocative, yet another sense of the image disappearing,
dissolving.
Yeah, exactly. So not merely a recapitulation of Freud, but sort of expanding and commenting on sort of representation itself.
And the original version of this work is no longer extant. So we're showing a photograph of it. You can see here, and then ours is one of several editions. And then just kind of going to the last work on that wall in Gallery 1, we've got Mae West's face, which may be used as a Surrealist apartment. Incredibly iconic work, and it's just like, what a phenomenal intervention this is. So basically, this work begins as a page of a magazine. Mae West had starred in a movie called She Done Him Wrong. And she had this like wonderful updo and these sparkly, dangly earrings. And Dalí goes in around to create the architecture that forms this Surrealist apartment, right? So her lips become the love seat. her nose, the fireplace with the mantle on it, and then her eyes have these wonderful picture frames around them. And this is the beginning of real sort of optical doubling, or sort of multiple images that we're seeing simultaneously. Right, so the image here and the information in this picture is constant, but sometimes you're going to see it as Mae West, and other times you're going to see this illusion of spatial recession that allows it to be a surrealist apartment. So very special for us to be able to present this.
I'm just going to quickly go through the corner where we have our case material that Caitlin referred to. This is a work that we hung there because the owner of it is also the person who collected many of the objects that we have in our library that relate to Dalí, and that's Mary Reynolds, who is an artist that should be much better known in her own right, a bookbinder, mainly of surrealist books. So this object was given to her, we believe, on a trip that she and her partner, Marcel Duchamp, took to Cadaqués, where Dalí kept a studio in 1933. And we included an image of the frame here because you'll see this new framing initiative throughout the exhibition, where we did historical research. We looked in the archives and found letters that Dalí wrote to his dealers, discussing the kinds of velvet that he wanted, the precise colors that he wanted to frame different types of pictures. We found original photographs and based our designs on the measurements we took from them. So this is just one of the most beautiful examples.
And Jen's being a little bit modest here. She actually went back to the records of this work coming to the museum, where it described it as being in a beautiful sort of tray-style frame with olive brown velvet. So that's what we've chosen to present it in here. And we also have it, this is one of several works being presented for the first time under a new and correct title.
Mm-hmm. It's also one of the very early moments where you'll see furniture in Dalí's paintings. So we'll see more drawers throughout the exhibition.
Landscapes. So let's just go maybe quickly through these.
Yeah. This is a postcard from the Dalí couple to the Duchamp Mary Reynolds couple, talking about a project they're working on together. And so it's really evocative because it's not dated. So it could refer to an exhibition, or there was a postcard series they worked on together. We also wanted to show in these cases the full spectrum of Dalí's work in print culture. So not only these boutique publications that he illustrated as part of the Surrealist movement, but how he starts to build his brand through print. Not only his exhibition catalogs, like this one on the left, which uses a collage that he titled the Surrealist Poster, which was appropriating a 19th century medical advertisement as sort of an advertisement for Dalí, incorporating some of his most well-known iconography already, the melting clock, ants, his childhood nurse. And then by late December, in 1936, we see that Dalí has made it from there to the cover of Time magazine in such a short amount of time. He always embraced fashion culture, and he's not unique in this as a surrealist, but he did take sort of the surrealist interest in outmoded styles of their youth, and really embraced contemporary fashion and actually collaborated on certain projects with designers. And so these are two works that are in the cases in our exhibition. One, a photograph of Dalí at the 1938 Paris Surrealist exhibition, where there was a street of mannequins. Each surrealist made their own mannequin design. So he took part in that. You can see his mannequin in the illustration to the right. The masked figure is his, and that ski mask came from a collection by Elsa Schiaparelli. It was a hot pink ski mask that she had designed, and ultimately she would come to be inspired by images in his paintings and create collections based on those.
All right, and then the last element of sort of the case that you see in the first gallery provides a quotation that is very central to really our interest in the whole show, and will be the theme of the second gallery. And it's Dalí writing here and saying, of a cubist picture, one asks, what does that represent? Of a surrealist picture, one sees what it represents, but asks, what does that mean? Of a paranoiac picture, one asks abundantly, what do I see? What does that represent? What does that mean? And this is going to be our introduction to the paranoiac critical method, which is on view in the second gallery of the show. These paintings of the mid to late 1930s, where we're seeing multiple images at the same time. And actually, I'll just go back for 1 second. The transparency that you see there, where it says the endless enigma, those sheets of tracing paper actually demonstrate how Dalí would superimpose image on top of image on top of image to create just such a rich and complex picture that will shift before your eyes. So there are so many wonderful paintings. To my taste, there is not a better Dalí painting than Apparition of a Face in a Fruit Dish. I love our works too, but this was a loan that we really fought for. And the first time I saw this at Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, I just was like so blown away by Dalí's technique, his skill, and kind of the performativity of his paintings, where you're looking at this and at one moment it is the fruit dish, and at the next moment it's like, I'm seeing the dog. What is that? Is that his collar? Is that a bridge? And he's making reference to quite well-known ambiguous or two-way images. So the dog's foot, right, you can see right there, is the duck rabbit, right? The famous emblem that Ludwig Wittgenstein would write about. And Dalí is, we sometimes would say he's an unreliable narrator about his own work. And he's also kind of changing up the relationship between the artist and the viewer vis-a-vis the meaning of his pictures. So with an artist like Dalí, you don't say, what is the artist's intention? You look at the work, and he's created so many different possibilities of what this work might mean. Determining what it is or its significance is really, that's on you as the viewer to determine, and that's a very novel idea. So in thinking about the paranoiac critical method and Dalí as a painter in the 30s, that is something that Jen and I got really into. Both of us love doing research in libraries. We also love collaborating with conservation. And because the museum's Dalí holdings are so popular, they are almost always on view when they're not out on loan. And that meant that pictures that had been in the museum for many decades, we hadn't been able to do things like X-ray them or do a pigment analysis or infrared reflectography. And we did that on every single painting in the museum's holdings. And we also looked at the surrealist object functioning symbolically and Venus de Milo with drawers. So you see here some of our colleagues in the museum's Department of Conservation and Science. And there have been so many wonderful aspects of this show, but the opportunity to really look closely at what is happening in these pictures was phenomenal. So we're going to spend some time thinking about two of the pictures. I'm going to take this chemist picture, and then Jen's going to talk about Inventions of the Monsters, because in the middle gallery of the show, these were in many ways our anchors, and we built out from them to either find repetitions of the imagery that you're seeing in them or other works that have similar ideas in mind. So here, I think it's maybe helpful just to sort of go through who are the figures that we're seeing, right? So the chemist figure, I'll identify him first. He is, or Jen, do you want to identify them you want to do the, so chemist figure, great. And then you'll see, let's go to the woman who's wearing the lovely orange full-length dress, her face as a bouquet of flowers. You will see her elsewhere in the show. You'll also see the chemist elsewhere in this gallery too. And then sitting with the kind of teal green beret, that is Wagner. And then the reclining figure is a composite that Dalí says is himself, his father, and Lenin. And it's deliberately a picture that will morph. It's hard to read. And here you can see other examples of the woman with the bouquet of flowers. This is, we think, we can't say for certain, but it's very likely Dalí himself holding the posture of the reclining figure there. But what we got quite interested in, and I'm going to go back to our picture, notice all of the craquelure on this surface. There are cracks all over this picture, except in one area in the center. And we said, let's take a look at that kind of ghostly presence. And when we did the infrared reflectogram, we discovered that the figure where there is no craquelure has an underdrawing of Ludwig II of Bavaria, who was Wagner's patron, right? So there is kind of a sense of an image that has disappeared, still in dialogue with what's on the surface of the work. And I'm showing a couple other fantastic loans to the exhibition. The three young surrealist women, where again we've got sort of flaccid musical instruments, pianos, cellos, women with these bouquets of flowers on their faces. And then sort of a lesser known work that Jen and I were extremely excited about called Morphological Echo, where I realize this is hard to see, but you can see that there's sort of a grid, a 3x3 grid. And Jen, maybe you could point out the reclining figure in the middle of the rightmost column, and he will morph into grapes in the lower level, right on the table, or into a foreshortened kind of landscape feature there. So as you're going through this grid, which is kind of a key to the whole second gallery, you've got sort of large-scale elements of landscape and architecture in the top, people in the middle, and then foodstuffs on the bottom level, each of them morphing into the other. And I'll pass it over to you for inventions.
Sure. This is another painting that we really looked closely together with conservation at, especially in terms of pigment analysis. So this was made while Dalí was vacationing in the Austrian Alps in 1937, so just a year before, so a dark moment for Europe, a year before Austria was annexed by Germany. And he spoke of the hybrid figures in this work as monsters. And so you can see that nearly every single figure, maybe with the exception of the giraffe and a figure which I'll tell you about in the lower right, are double portraits of in some fashion. There's the figure with the blue wings, a cat woman, angel, a horse woman. Down in the lower left quadrant, there's a double portrait of Dalí and Gala, one rendered rather photographically, and the other he called in pre-Raphaelite style. So he's actually using a style that itself harkens back to another style. There's just doubling of doubling in this painting, and the composition itself is really divided. So you can see that it's rather unbalanced. On the left, we have in the upper left we have almost centaur figures bathing, and at the upper right, a burning giraffe. So contrast of fire and water. And when the Art Institute acquired this work in 1943, Dalí telegrammed our curators, and he congratulated them on the purchase. He described all of these hybrid figures as monsters, and in the lower right, he said, the little blue dog, which you can sort of hardly see, but if you look really close in the gallery, you will almost see this blue lapdog figure. And he said that this is not a true monster. So we were so curious to learn more about sort of did this pigment change over time? Was this intentional? It's such a very strange composition, especially when you see the very vibrant blue wings. You wonder if maybe he used a different pigment that had faded. And what we discovered based on historical photography and our pigment analysis is that, no, really, this is just it's a ghostly figure, and that's intentional. And so what we think is that when Dalí, he did at certain times depict dogs, various breeds, and we think that this is likely an allusion to the Andalusian dog, or his friend Federico Garcia Lorca, who he had been really stunned to find that had been killed in the Spanish Civil War in 1936. So if we go to the next, yes, we have this displayed in the gallery alongside a preparatory drawing, again, from the Bergman collection, which shows, again, the leftmost portrait of Dalí and his wife Gala. Right, and so we have positioned this painting about monsters and the sort of impending war in Europe next to a trio of works from museums around the world. It's just a sort of wonderful opportunity to see these together, and also to see in person works that are really hard to reproduce. Yeah. So I hope you'll notice in the gallery that the sort of green that you see,
the color in these slides is all wrong. Actually.
Yeah.
We tried, but it's
so soft construction with boiled beans from the Philadelphia Museum of Art in the center of the slide has this sort of radioactive green, which I was like stunned to see in person, and then autumnal cannibalism to the left. Is coming to us from the Tate Modern in London. Again, completely different in person than the knife, which is sort of slicing into this amorous, cannibalistic couple, just gleams. It's super beautiful. And then the sublime moment on the right comes to us from the Staatsgallery in Stuttgart. So autumn cannibalism, Dalí said that the monsters of civil war at this time were making their way onto his canvases. And so this is another sort of way of thinking about the hybrid figure, this intimately connected soft couple, which is dining on each other, and really kind of an uncomfortable way that Dalí makes this conflict of civil war very tender. You see, I'd like you to notice on the top of the man's head, there's an apple. You'll also see sort of the lamb chop imagery from his portrait of Gala, some drawers. And then moving on to the soft construction with boiled beans, we see another monstrous soft construction, sort of contorted figure appearing to be in pain, and both soft and petrified nearly. And you can sort of see it's more obvious in the preliminary drawings, but the contours of this figure really chart the geography of Spain. Again, you'll see iconography of furniture, foodstuffs. Dalí wrote about this painting that he couldn't imagine portraying such a difficult subject of civil war without accompanying it with boiled beans as sort of kind of an attractive,
simple food.
Very simple, food stuff.
And just to point out too, you'll probably notice that our chemist figure has reappeared in this painting also. I'm going to maybe go just a little faster, Jen. I'm looking at the time. We started a moment late. We touched on the Image Disappears trio, really obviously extremely important group for us. And also the apparition of a face in a fruit dish. So I would say don't miss this painting, but there's also no way to miss it because it's on such an important sightline. But in the third and final area of the exhibition, we take up the theme of Venus, goddess of love. And we have in our collection this Venus de Milo with drawers. This is the original. This is taken from a half-scale plaster of Venus de Milo, into which Dalí, with the aid of Marcel Duchamp, found a cabinet maker who would cut in physical working drawers to create spaces of interiority. And then in the 1960s, when he wanted to create a series of bronzes, he went back in and on the drawer pulls added these mink pompons. So we knew that Venus would be of significance to us. We did not know how significant Venus would become. And what I'm showing you here is Julian Levy photograph of the exterior of Dalí's Dream of Venus pavilion, which was his contribution to the New York World's Fair in 1939. And it was sort of a surrealist funhouse. That becomes relevant to us vis-a-vis this painting, which our exhibition presents for the first time under the title, untitled, Dream of Venus, formerly Visions of Eternity. So those of you who are regular visitors to the modern and contemporary collection galleries will know this work very, very well. It entered the museum's holdings in 1987 under the title Visions of Eternity, and it was dated to 1936. So all of the works, all the paintings that we've just been looking at in the previous slides that Jen and I took you through tend to be from around 1936, 37, 38. And when we started looking at this picture, we said, this actually is nothing like those works. We needed to sort of trust our gut on this and say, the other works are so tight and finely rendered, they draw you in. This is something that you want to see from 10 to 20 feet away. The other works have so much imagery, this is rather vacant. Simultaneously, we were speaking with our colleagues in conservation who were saying, you know, there's a lot of varnish on here that's not original, there's some overpainting, let us clean this up. And we said, okay, we trust you, you'll bring it back to an original surface, and we will go into the library and try to figure out what we have on our hands. And in the library, it actually ended up being an issue of Vogue from 1939 that held the key to our discovery. And this is an article, actually, and I have to say, Jen was the person who found this. There were many of us, it was a day of glee with many people from around the Art Institute on email chains saying, well, what about this and what about that? But Jen started this out by noticing this little walking figure here with a pack over his shoulder. And we said, well, we recognize him. There he is. Okay. So what if this was made in 1939 rather than 1936? And then we said, well, okay, he's making this surrealist dream house. What do we know about this surrealist dream house that he's creating? Well, the Dream of Venus Pavilion is an incredible project. It had a wet chamber with living liquid ladies performing mermaids, sometimes called 20,000 Legs Under the Sea. It also had a dry chamber where Dalí presented a mural that brought in many of his most iconic elements, these melting clocks, these giraffes on fire. And we noticed that there were some beans that looked pretty familiar to us, and also this archway. And so we said, okay, he's using our imagery. And then we realized it wasn't just the imagery, that is actually our painting. And at the end of the World's Fair, when they were doing what we would call the dispersal, this was cut from the larger mural and made an individual composition. All of the area of the mural to the left that is extant is made into 4 compositions that are today in museums in Japan. But we are presenting to you for the very first time a missing fragment of the Dream of Venus Pavilion. And so yeah, that's, I mean, really, Jen, amazing find. And also to our colleagues in conservation. Full round of applause. Once we knew that the Dream of Venus Pavilion would be part of our story, we also wanted to include photographs taken by Julian Levy. So you can see Dalí working on the construction of the facade. You can also see some of the living liquid ladies. And I also want to give a shout out to Lara Balikci for amazing work it was getting on my nerves that we knew the name of every male figure in these works, including some of people casting shadows, but we didn't know the names of any of the mermaids. So we can tell you today, thanks to Laura's research, that Betty Kuzmek, Kelsey Carr, Eileen Mitchell, and Mary Spence Francis were these living liquid ladies. And there you can see them swimming. Dalí actually did not stay in New York long enough to see the pavilion open. He was incredibly frustrated by the bureaucracy involved in putting on a World's Fair, as you can imagine. And one of the things that Dalí wanted most to do was to have a mermaid on the facade of the Dream of Venus pavilion. But he didn't want it to be a traditional mermaid. He wanted it to be Botticelli's Birth of Venus with a fish head as opposed to a fish tail. And the organizers refused him this wish. If he would have agreed to a fish tail, yes. Fish head, no. So Dalí produces this pamphlet, this flyer, the Declaration of the Independence of the Imagination and the Rights of Man to His Own Madness, just like absolutely telling them how wrong they are and that they need to embrace creativity. And we decided that we would give Dalí his inverted mermaid. So you'll see that as you're leaving the exhibition on an architectural scale for the first time. But Jen, I'll let you bring us home with the actual Venus de Milo with drawers.
Yeah, I'm conscious that we're 4 minutes away from 3, and I wonder if we want to give everyone time to see the exhibition. We should maybe should we close and ask a question?
Okay. I mean, we can. This is all of this interiority. I mean, it's totally contemporaneous with the Dream of Venus Pavilion. And what Jen's research has allowed us to do is to kind of link together these exhibitions at Julian Levy Gallery, where the Venus de Milo with drawers was presented.
Yeah, so he presents it at the same year, a month before he starts work on the Dream of Venus Pavilion. On a model of the Trilon and Perisphere, these sort of icons of the world of tomorrow theme of the New York World's Fair. And what you see here on the cover of the exhibition catalog for this exhibition is that he's depicting the Trilon and Perisphere as sort of in ruins. So you you get a sense that for him, Venus is a big deal. Venus is sort of his vision for what his art could be, sort of a lasting art.
New classicism.
New classicism that would outlast sort of the rubble that he's expecting to find in Europe.
Yeah. So we wanted to end with a thank you to all of our colleagues who have allowed the Art Institute to put on its first Dalí exhibition. So you'll see their names here, folks from across the museum. And we know that people are eager to get into the exhibition, but we do have time for a couple of questions if there are any questions from the audience. And there will be staff members with microphones. So just raise your hand and we will bring a microphone to you so that we can get your question recorded. And if anybody wants to leave now, of course, that's totally permissible, but Jen and I will be here to answer questions too.
We have a couple questions in front.
Okay, Miguel, we've got questions in the front.
You say often that he described his works, and sometimes the description changed over time. Was he an artist that enjoyed specifically saying what his works were about? Because I don't think a lot of artists do that. I mean, songwriters, any type of artist.
Well, what's interesting, and that's a great question. I mean, Dalí wasn't shy about talking about his works. You know, he would go on and on and on. He just wasn't consistent in it.
He wrote at length.
Yeah, he wrote at length. And this is not sort of a Jasper Johns, saying, I'm not going to talk about the meaning of my pictures. He would absolutely kind of enjoy the fabulation around them.
What I found most interesting is that he will tell you what the things in his pictures are, right? He'll say, this is that, this equals that, this equals that. But then my favorite quote from him was his visit to the Art Institute in 1937, when he told a reporter that the effect he was trying to produce was one of malaise. So really, despite knowing this is that, ants equal to K, the soft clock equals relativity of time.
What does it add up to?
What does it add up to? And I think Dalí was conscious of the fact that it was more a feeling feeling than a specific interpretation.
Yes.
Yeah, so this period of time in which you're focusing on Dali's work would have been smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression. So I'm wondering to what extent, if any, that impacted Dali, his imagery, the viewer, or his contemporaries.
Fantastic question.
There was-
Do you want to take that, Jen?
I have a couple of thoughts, nothing too well thought out, but I did notice that when he departs, he runs straight back to Europe after the World's Fair closes in 1939. There's a moment where he's having trouble getting the funds from the sale of his work and struggling a bit there. There was a moment too when I thought that the figure that with the pack was maybe a version of a migrant worker, and it struck me as a little odd coming from someone who is accused of being money hungry, and all of these accusations flying at him about his careerism. I wondered, is he sort of identifying with migrancy because he's such an itinerant figure? He is in exile, pretty much, and kind of going from city to city in the 30s. But I also think it could be a butterfly net. I don't know too much if he's taking that up in his work.
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, we've thought a lot about, how the Spanish Civil War figures into his imagery, how World War II premonitions of war are figuring in, but we haven't really taken that economic angle or really thought about his experience in the U.S. at that time. So that will be something for us to think about while the exhibition is on view between now and June. Are there any other questions? We've got a couple.
Hello. So we get to enjoy the fruits of your labors. How long did it take from the moment someone said, let us do a Dalí exhibit until today?
Basically, Jen's first day at the museum in ModCon, we were looking at Venus de Milo with drawers. And I mean, what's interesting, you probably noticed this. I mean, Jen has worked on Dalí quite a bit longer than I have. I mean, my interest in his work comes from the Art Institute's holdings and just having incredible riches here. So I was trying to get up to speed really in my first year in 2018 on these terrific Dalí holdings that we have. They were of interest to you as well.
Yeah, I'd worked mainly on his sort of ephemeral practice and things that are no longer with us. So it took me a little bit to get up to speed on his painting practice. But yeah, I would say at least 4 years.
Yeah, 4 to 5 years. And the show has gone through different iterations. At one point in time, it was just going to be in the large square gallery on the third floor of the Modern Wing. And then when the Gallery 289, where this is being presented, was going to be an exhibition space, we said, well, okay, let's make it a little bit larger and see if we can tell this story of who Dalí was across the 30s.
I had a question. When I was going through the exhibit, one thing that jumped out at me was the use of the word brand. I think it was used in the context of Dalí establishing his brand, and you used the same phrase or a similar phrase in your presentation. I was just wondering why you used that word and what it.
It's interesting thank you. I mean, the Wall Street Journal picked up on that also in the preview that they published last week. Dalí was a showman, a performer. I don't know. Yeah, I see you nodding. You want to take this too?
Well, I feel like it's this kind of dialectic that we're working, where we're seeing all these moments of disappearance in his work during the decade, when really what he's doing is appearing on the scene.
Yes.
So that's where we're trying to go with kind of talking about how he's building his brand, and also what I was saying about the way that his iconography kind of adds up to almost a feeling of malaise. That's a way that he built his brand. So when you think that. When you see these things reoccurring throughout his work, their meaning accrues through their use. They come to mean something about who Dalí is that's sort of in addition to a way that we interpret them.
So there's this aspect of Dalí's own performativity, but also his interest in his audience and really making surrealism for popular audiences, right? I mean, the Dream of Venus Pavilion, one of the slights that it received was people called it actually watered down surrealism. But it's not watered down surrealism. It's actually showing how this very advanced avant-garde type of art making can absolutely coincide with, capitalist culture in the U.S. and in the 30s and 40s.
Caitlin, just really quickly, we have time for one more question.
Okay, one more. We don't. There's. I see one in the front here. If we could get a microphone to this member here.
I'm just wondering, since he's from Catalonia, and so is Gaudi, and that Camembert facade on Sagrada Familia was really familiar when I was looking at these pictures. I wonder, was there a relationship between Gaudi and Dalí?
Yes, absolutely. Dalí was 100% in love with Gaudi's architecture, and he wrote an amazing essay on edible architecture. So he uses the softness of Gaudi's architecture to think about, whenever you see softness in the exhibition, he's thinking about Gaudí for sure, but to think about what is sort of the dark side of desire when something is appealing to you. Is there a point at which you would want to integrate it into your body by eating it? And so he talks about these ideas at great length, and he's hugely inspired by Gaudí. He's at the heart of his thinking around disappearance, in my view.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming out this afternoon. We have some instructions, I think, about how to get into the queue.